There's a famous saying in boxing, styles make fights. It essentially means that anyone can be beaten by anyone else, and despite what conventional wisdom would have you believe, outcomes aren't just decided by talent, power, and God-given abilities. Well, in Yu-Gi-Oh, formats make cards. Some Yu-Gi-Oh cards are completely overtuned and given so many powerful effects that it's near impossible for them to fail. Such was the case with Sacrifice, True Draco Masterpiece, Totally Awesome, and Heavy Metaphors Electromite, all meta-dominant cards that found their way onto the Yu-Gi-Oh! Forbidden and Limited list. In the same vein as these powerhouses, there was recently a card that simply seemed too good to be true. One that appeared to be destined to completely dominate and warp the Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG metagame, have most of the community trembling in fear or crying for it to be banned as soon as possible. But the interesting thing is, the exact opposite happened, and it failed miserably compared to those lofty expectations, despite every sign saying that it would terrorize the TCG. Welcome to another episode of the biggest flops in Yu-Gi-Oh! History, and today we're going to discuss Red Eye's Dark Dragoon. In this video, you'll learn all about the card, its incredible dominance in the OCG, the hefty expectations it had over here, and ultimately why the card failed to meet those. For this Yu-Gi-Oh! Story, we don't have to travel very far back at all, just a few years to the second half of 2019. Before Dragoon's debut in the OCG, the card was first revealed online by Konami just past the midway point of October. Believe me when I tell you, Dragoon of Red Eyes, as it was initially known in the OCG, got one hell of a reaction from the Yu-Gi-Oh! Community. This was one of those cards that just screamed from the mountaintops, broken to the umpteenth degree, and made just about everyone want to quote the Kali effect and say,
"Oh no, what are you doing, baby?"
Dragoon was insane, sporting an impressive 3,000 attack and 2,500 defense. Although the stats were honestly just the tip of the iceberg. This behemoth couldn't be targeted by card effects, destroyed by card effects, had built-in Omni Negation at the cost of a discard. This effect also gave him a permanent 1,000 attack boost if he negated a card in the hand or on the field. Lastly, Dragoon came equipped with a completely free, non-targeting monster destruction effect that could be used up to twice per turn, and also did burn damage. I've played the Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG for over 20 years. This is one of the few times in all my days that I legitimately thought a card was created by the fans rather than Konami research and development. Dragoon just seemed needlessly stuffed with amazing effect upon amazing effect for no reason at all. This is just my opinion, but did Dragoon really need that burn damage too? The card already had 2 layers of protection, Omni Negation, a built-in way to get stronger, and free destruction. This burn effect pretty much just meant that this guy could literally win games by himself. Considering Dragoon was a Dark Magician and Red Eyes crossover, some argued that a card of this power and magnitude was overdue for the fanfare. After all, while Blue Eyes was having its Tier 1 competitive run in the TCG and OCG that would see it top many YCS tournaments and ultimately win the 2016 Yu-Gi-Oh! World Championship using its new support from Shining Victories, Dark Magician and Red Eyes didn't come close to those accomplishments, even given that each team essentially had its own core booster set, with Red Eyes getting Clash of Rebellion and Dark Magician having the Dark Illusion. Many fans thought that DM and Red Eyes were finally getting the bone that they deserved for years. When Dragoon made its OCG debut, it premiered almost as the year was ending on December 21st in the OCG exclusive Legendary Gold Box. OCG Duelist took no time as it began making its mark in their metagame immediately. 2019 was a year known for being heavily filled with the powerful Orcus archetype in the OCG's metagame. Orcus combos were renowned for being incredibly simple to pull off, as basically any 2 monsters could be used to pull off the full combo. Hence the popular meme, any 2 monsters is full Orcus combo. Well, post the release of the Legendary Gold Box, any 2 monsters could also be Dragoon. This was thanks in part to one of the most heinous link monsters to ever be created, Predaplant Verte Anaconda. Verte could be used summoning any 2 effect monsters and would essentially cheat Dragoon out by sending its appropriate fusion spell and materials from the deck to the graveyard. This was considered a fusion summon, so the free destruction effect was completely online. If Verte wasn't an option, duelists could elect to just activate Red Eye's Fusion, which would summon the Great Wizard at the expense of all other summons for the turn. Both incredibly simplistic plays that got you to your ace boss monster. Dragoon instantly took over the identity of the Trickstar archetype and deck. It basically just became a pile of cards that specialized in turboing out Dragoon ASAP. The build you see before you was piloted by a duelist named Kamito, who went 8-1 and took first place at the Ketsu Championship of almost 200 duelists. Trickstar Light Stage, Trickstar Candina, and Sky Striker Mobilize Engage were all one-card Dragoons via Verte Anaconda. There Can Be Only One was main deck to lock out other meta contenders like Orcus and Endymion, which needed multiple machine or spellcaster monsters to play optimally, while this deck only needed Dragoon to clinch victory. At this time, Invoke builds also started to heavily feature Dragoon and made adjustments to facilitate the card. Even though this was still technically an Invoke strategy, to be honest, Dragoon pretty much took over the identity of Invoke 2 during this format. As you see, Invoked not only started to incorporate a Trickstar engine, but it focused much more on Trickstar Carobane specifically. This card could be searched with Trickstar Light Stage, then special summoned prior to Alistair hitting the field. That play ended with both Invoke Makaba and Dragoon on board, which was more devastating and stronger than anything Invoked had been able to pull off prior to this. This build in front of you took third place at that same Tetsu Championship, also having a record of 8-1. As these Dragoon decks rose in popularity, one thing became abundantly clear. The OCG metagame was simply ill-prepared for the card. To put it bluntly, they just didn't have enough legitimate answers to Dragoon. If you summon the card versus Orcus, Sky Striker, or Endymion, chances are they had one card in their entire deck that could actually deal with this terror. Let me make one thing clear. First off, they had to be able to access said card. Secondly, if it was, for instance, let's say a monster like Orcus Dingirsu, well, Dragoon could just negate its effect. And even if Ding lived via its protection, who cares? Dragoon would still be alive and well and ready to end the game in a turn or two because of its destruction and burn effect. The OCG did have access to the all-powerful Dark Ruler No More during this January 2020 format. However, that card was never main deck, so it didn't help players in game 1. Also, Invoke builds main deck Solemn Judgment, so if they answered your Dark Ruler with Solemn, you basically just lost the duel right then and there. As mentioned earlier, Trickstar duelists went the other route and played Floodgates like Vanity's Emptiness and Tisibu, which could honestly just make negating the Dragoon for a turn pointless, as you probably wouldn't be able to get over it anyways. Even the Great Max C offered little solace for dealing with Dragoon, as it would only grant one card if a player summoned Dragoon off Red Eye's Fusion, and even if they did use it to counter Verte Anaconda, as mentioned earlier, most decks only had about one out in their entire main deck anyways. Ironically, Invoked was pretty much the only deck that was fully prepared for dealing with its own Frankenstein, as it could be played with Kaijus and Super Polymerization, neither of which Dragoon could respond to. As Dragoon became more prominent in the OCG competitive format, players became progressively more frustrated that a single monster was basically deciding every duel. This was like Necroz's Genlock 2.0, except every deck could summon Dragoon via Verte. Look at the breakdown from March 2020 in terms of deck representation, and how Sky Striker and even Orcus had now shifted to include Dragoon. This doesn't even mention Eldritch, Shadows, and other decks. Basically, the entire pool of archetypes and strategies just ran the card and it ran their format. Dragoon had eclipsed meta warping levels at this point, and trying to defend against the card was pretty futile. Unlike many boss monsters, Dragoon wasn't a big bad you could stall out by constantly setting monsters in face down defense position. In fact, thanks to Dragoon's free removal and burn effect, you'd actually get punished for even trying to defend yourself from the card. To Konami's credit, they listened to the outcry of the player base and did actually attempt to hit Dragoon and friends on their next limit regulation list. Unfortunately, they did it in the most nonsensical way imaginable, imaginable. Konami limited Dragoon, Red Eyes Fusion, and Verte Anaconda. This could have been seen as a game changer unless you thought about it for more than like a second and realized that they only needed a single copy of each card to summon Dragoon and essentially do the same thing as if each card was unlimited. Limiting Fusion did reduce the chance of someone drawing that card specifically, but it was also searchable by way of Red Eye's Insight, so even that move didn't change all that much. Some could say that Konami did get what it desired with the Red Eyes Dark Magician Fanfare card dominating the meta. Keep in mind, Konami did originally print Dragoon as a 20th anniversary secret rare and even put Dragoon on the competitive tournament mats, so clearly they were promoting it hard and had high expectations for the card itself. Moving forward, decks like Orcus that could turbo out Verte Anaconda continued to prosper backed by the power of Dragoon. However, not to the extent of the January 2020 format where it was literally Dragoon format. Dragoon would be banned on the October 2020 OCG limit regulation list alongside number S0 Yatopic Zexal, ending its incredible run right then and there. Dragoon's OCG dominance set the stage for it to have an expected seismic run in the TCG, and that's what many were expecting when the card premiered in the 2020 10 of Lost Memories on August 27th. Dragoon had lots of hype behind it, and Verte of course was a cheat code for getting the card on field easily, but it kind of floundered right out the gate. Instead of the format being Dragoon coin flip matches, we saw major continued success from the likes of Adamanticators, Dragon Link, and Eldritch variants. In addition, newcomers such as Dogmatica and Infernoble entered the competitive fray. Absolutely none of these strategies relied on Dragoon as a card at the time. In fact, nearly all the best builds basically ignored him. It may seem puzzling at first, as the card was just as strong and hadn't lost any power, but there was one huge game-changing variable that was completely different this time around. In the TCG, Rise of the Duelist was legal for Dragoon's initial run. In fact, Rise actually predated Dragoon by 3 full weeks. This meant that Duelists had nearly a month to familiarize themselves with all the new strong cards. This set in particular was not only loaded with them, but more specifically, Dragoon killers. Ice Dragon's Prison, a trap that could summon the fusion material Dark Magician, then banish that same Magician and Dragoon simultaneously. Triple Tactics Talent, a new spell that could let a player take control of Dragoon, then turn it against their master. Forbidden Droplet, a powerhouse quick play that could negate Dragoon's effect and shrink it down to 1500 attack, nullifying all prior attack gains. Droplet was also notable for being a card that Dragoon often couldn't respond to at all. Shadow Schism, a trap that summoned Shadow fusion monsters during the opponent's turn. This could send an opponent's monster to the grave that was the same attribute as the monster you summoned. This was key as Wyndham met that Dragoon killing dark attribute condition, and if Schism was played while Magical Meltdown was active, once again, Dragoon could not negate this play. Lastly, there was Dogmatica Fleur-de-Lis. She could be easily searched and special summoned to the field to negate an opponent's face-up monster, nullifying, yet again, all Dragoon's prior attack gains. Once she attacked, her attack would increase to 3000 and she was always guaranteed to trade with Dragoon in battle. One all-world powerful set with nearly half a dozen Dragoon hard counters inside of it. So many of these cards being released at the same time was obviously horrible for Dragoon's meta aspirations, but to make matters even worse, the diversity of these cards basically made it so that every deck and strategy could incorporate at least one of them into their deck. Droplet and Talents were great for combo and mid-range. IDP found its way into slower trap-based decks like Pure Eldritch and Altergeist, while control builds such as Invoked made great use of the Dogmatica and Shadow cards. This avalanche of Dragoon counters made the card feel nearly dead on arrival, and to be honest, things actually got worse with the release of the Phantom Rage Core Booster set and the meta shift. Phantom Rage brought forth Divine Arsenal AA Zeus, the Virtual World archetype, and Alpha Master of the Beast. Alpha was simply a side deck option that could force or non-targeting bounce the Dragoon. The far larger problems, however, were VW and Zeus. Virtual World soon became the top meta deck thanks to its proficiency in making level 9 and rank 9 Xyz monsters, most notably the format-defining True King of All Calamities. This deck could also turn other Xyz monsters into Zeus Zeus, which sent all other cards to the graveyard once activated and was not a hard once per turn, or even a once per chain effect for that matter. This meant that Zeus pretty much shafted Dragoon, as if Dragoon attempted to negate, Zeus could just activate again and resolve before Dragoon's negation affected, meaning of course that they would both be taken down. The Virtual World deck could also make Utopia Beyond to reduce Dragoon's attack to 0 and just run it over, not to mention this strategy could main deck Talents and Droplet both. Drytron was another tier 1 contender that also had Talents, Droplet, and Zeus as options, but this deck could also easily make Boral Sword Dragon and just gain Dragoon's attack and run it over in battle. This led to yet another format where the best decks in the game weren't actually using the card. Yes, Dragoon did appear as somewhat of a mainstay in the more stunnish competitive decks of Trap Eldritch and Guru Control, and those decks had varying levels of success. However, they were never considered to be among the highest of the tier 1 decks during that time. This led to Dragoon clearly failing to meet its meta-cracking expectations, and the card mainly being seen as a champion for stun decks as they often lack the offense to close out games quickly, which of course Dragoon specialized in, as well as the fact that stun decks often relied on powerful floodgates like Imperial Order, Summon Limit, and There Can Be Only One to slow the game down, which paired fantastically with the Great Wizard. Post Phantom Rage, it became more and more clear. In the TCG, our situation was the complete opposite of what happened in Asia. While the OCG had little to no answers for the mighty Dragoon of Red Eyes, on our side, we had too many answers for Red Eyes Dark Dragoon. Invoked, Drytron, Virtual World Zodiac, it seemed like no matter what deck you were facing off against, your opponent didn't sweat buckets and start panicking at the sight of Dragoon hitting the field. I don't want to paint the picture of no combo decks using Dragoon because it was fairly common for Phantom Knights to run the card, as they could combine any 2 leftover monsters to make Verte and hence a copy of Dragoon. Heck, even some Drytron players used the engine as well, but many combo players detested having to run 2 objectively terrible cards in their deck to summon a boss monster that could usually be outed fairly easily by other combo decks using the cards that I've mentioned earlier. In addition, things like Dark Ruler No More. Dragoon would continue to see very light amounts of competitive success, but the ultimate blow to the card's legacy would come with the arrival of the Burst of Destiny core booster set and the format-defining Destiny Hero Phoenix Enforcer. While DPE wasn't nearly as powerful as Dragoon, this card basically did in the TCG what Dragoon was supposed to do. Just like Dragoon, DPE had a non-targeting destruction effect and could easily be summoned with Verte Anaconda, but unlike Dragoon, if DPE was negated and killed, it would just come back during the next turn. The fact that its effect usually removed itself in the process also made it harder to pin down and take out. DPE also had far better materials to work with, both had solid effects that could activate from the graveyard for powerful utility, and DPE's fusion spell was far less forgiving than Red Eye's fusion. DPE also paired beautifully with the format-breaking artifact site for near auto win setups. Its impact and dominance was otherworldly and would lead to hits to Fusion Destiny and both the TCG and OCG respectively. Again, this was the impact that many expected Dragoon to have in the TCG, and it's pretty ironic because while DPE looked amazing on paper when it was first revealed, I don't think anyone had it being a meta-defining card. When you consider Dragoon's legacy as a whole, it's complicated. Obviously, it was a colossal flop in the TCG for sure, hence the fact that it's still completely unlimited here, and no one even talks about the card being much of a threat at the time of me recording this video, at least in our competitive metagame. However, in the OCG, it completely destroyed and defined their January 2020 format, a prime testament of how an objectively broken card can have 2 completely different outcomes when introduced into 2 completely different metagames. And with that, we are at the conclusion of this Yu-Gi-Oh story. If you enjoyed the video, or more importantly, you learned something, give the video a big thumbs up and subscribe if you have not already for more videos like this in the future. Also, go ahead and check out some of the other Yu-Gi-Oh stories that are on screen right now that I think that you will enjoy. Thanks for watching.